Are dogs really a man's best friend? Hey, I'm G. In this episode, I tackle a question that feels as old as time itself. Are dogs really a man's best friend? But as you'll see, I don't just answer it with a simple yes or no. Instead, I dive into the systems, history, and legal frameworks that shape our relationship with our canine companions. Grab a coffee and get ready to think. Welcome to the Stuff You Should Think About podcast. I answer everyday questions about the phenomena and objects around you in quick, bite-sized episodes. I go get the answers because you don't have time to, and I bring them back in a way you can listen to on your break, on your way to work, on your way home, while you're cooking dinner, or any little bit of free time you've got. All right, let's get into it. For this episode, let's be clear. I want to start by saying I am no expert by any means. I'm not a historian, a lawyer, a veterinarian, or animal behaviorist. I'm just a curious person who did some digging, and I'm here to share what I found. The goal isn't to tell you what to think, but to give you some new things to think about. So, the question, are dogs really a man's best friend? It's a phrase we've all heard 1,000 times. It's on coffee mugs, framed and cross-stitched, and posted in countless social media captions. But have you ever stopped to wonder where that idea comes from? And more importantly, how does our society actually treat this supposed best friend? Is this just a sentimental saying, or is it backed up by the systems we've built around ourselves and our dogs? Today, we're not going to explore the emotional validity of the bond. Instead, we're going to look at the mechanics. We're going to look at the system of domestication, the legal structure of ownership, and the social function that dogs serve in our world. To understand the system, we have to go back to the beginning. The entire relationship is built on a foundation called domestication. The process wasn't a single event, but a long, slow evolutionary dance that began tens of thousands of years ago. The most accepted theory is that certain wolves were less fearful of humans. These bolder, or perhaps more desperate, wolves started scavenging near human camps. Over generations, the wolves that were more tolerant of humans, better at reading human cues, and less aggressive were more successful. They got more food, survived longer, and had more offspring. Humans, in turn, saw benefit. These proto-dogs could act as an alarm system, a cleanup crew, and eventually a hunting partner. This is the foundational mechanical function of the system, symbiosis. We provided food and safety, they provided services. This process, driven by natural and artificial selection, is what created the biological and behavioral blueprint for the modern dog. Fast forward to today. That system of function has evolved. While some dogs still have jobs, herding, police work, assistance, the primary function for millions of dogs has shifted to companionship. This is a huge change. They've moved from being a tool to a part of the family unit. But here's the mechanical crux of the matter. Legally, the system hasn't fully caught up. In the eyes of the law in the United States and most Western countries, your dog is not your friend, your child, or your family member in a legal sense. Your dog is your property. This legal structure, derived from English common law, categorizes animals as cattle. That's the same legal category for your car, your furniture, or your phone. This classification dictates everything about their systemic existence. It means you have the right to buy, sell, and breed them. It means if someone injures or kills your dog, the legal recourse is typically limited to the market value of the dog, what you paid for them, rather than compensation for your emotional distress or loss of companionship. It also means that if you can't pay rent, your dog can be considered part of your seized assets. The entire legal system we built is structured around the concept of ownership, not friendship. Now, this might sound a bit grim, but it's important to understand where the system works and where it's challenged. And here is actual significant bipartisan agreement on certain aspects of our relationships with dogs. First, and most obviously, is the widespread condemnation of animal cruelty. Laws against dogfighting, neglect, and abuse exist in all 50 states and are supported by the public regardless of political affiliation. There's a common understanding that even as property, animals have a right to a baseline standard of care and freedom from malicious harm. This is a bedrock element of common ground. Second, the role of service animals is another area of broad agreement. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, provides robust protections for individuals with disabilities who rely on their service dogs. This isn't a partisan issue. It's a widely accepted social good that acknowledges the unique functional bond between a specific human and a specific dog, embedding it into our civil rights legislation. This shows the system can and does adapt to recognize a deeper function beyond simple property. This tension between dog as property and dog as friend plays out in our legal system, often in surprising ways. Let's look at the foundations. You might think the First Amendment has anything to do with dogs, but it does, especially in the realm of animal rights. A key legal battleground has been over ag-gag laws, passed in some states that criminalize the undercover recording of activities on farms and in slaughterhouses. Animal rights activists argued that documenting potential animal cruelty is an act of protected free speech, exposing a matter of public concern. The industries argue it's a violation of privacy and property rights. This fight is fundamentally a First Amendment issue, and dogs often at the center of the public debate around animal welfare. The U.S. Supreme Court has weighed in directly on a related case. In 2010, the United States versus Stevens reached the highest court. The case was about a federal law that banned the creation, sale, and possession of certain depictions of animal cruelty, specifically videos of dogfighting. The defendant, Robert Stevens, had sold such videos. The Supreme Court struck down the law, ruling that it was an overbroad restriction on free speech. While the decision was about the depictions and not the act itself, it set a major precedent. The government's interest in preventing animal cruelty, while important, was not significant enough to override the fundamental protections of the First Amendment. This shows how deeply our foundational laws are woven into every aspect of this debate. We touched on this before, but it's worth reinforcing. The domestication of the dog is intertwined with the history of human civilization. They weren't just pets, They were critical tools for survival and agriculture. The concept of them as property isn't inherently malicious. It's a historical artifact from a time when they were primarily working animals. The system we inherited was built for a world of working dogs, not for the world of Instagram famous corgis and emotional support animals. The lag between our emotional reality and this historical system is where much of modern friction lies. Full transparency here, because I promised I would. I have a dog. She's a mixed rescue with one floppy ear and an uncanny ability to steal socks. For me, personally, the phrase, a man's best friend, is an absolute fact. The joy, comfort, and chaos she brings to my life is immeasurable. My bias is firmly on the yes, they are side of the emotional ledger. But that's not what we're analyzing today. This podcast is about understanding the system, the legal, social, and historical mechanics, and it's critical to separate our personal, emotional truths from the objective operation of the structures around us. My love for my dog doesn't change the fact, on paper, she's legally considered my property. Acknowledging that gap is the first step to understanding it. To understand how these systems can change, we can look at a powerful historical parallel, the legal status of children. For much of Western history, children were legally considered the property of their fathers. Under the legal doctrine of patria potestas, a father had virtually absolute control over his children, including the right to disown them, apprentice them out without their consent, and in early Roman law, even expose them to elements. Over centuries, driven by shifts in social philosophy, science, and morality, that system completely changed. We moved from viewing children as property to viewing them as persons in their own right, with their own intrinsic rights that the state has an interest in protecting. This is a clear parallel. The debate about dogs today echoes this historical shift. Are they simply things we own, or are they sentient beings with interests that society should recognize? We're not suggesting dogs should have the same rights as children, but the process of reevaluating a legal and social construct based on a deeper understanding of sentience and bond is a direct parallel. It shows us that these systems are not permanent, they can and do evolve. So, if the system is lagging, what could be done? The goal, it seems, is to find a way for our legal framework to better reflect the unique role and value of companion animals without creating unworkable chaos. There are multiple potential paths to that goal, and I'm not here to endorse any single one, but just to lay them out. The first solution is the linguistic shift. One of the simplest proposed solutions is to change the language in our laws. Instead of referring to people as owners, we could legally call them guardians or caretakers. Several cities, like Boulder, Colorado, and San Francisco, have already made this change in their municipal codes. This doesn't immediately change property rights, but it does shift the philosophical foundation. It reframes the relationship from one of dominion to one of responsibility, which could influence everything from custody battles and divorces to anti cruelty statutes. The next solution, a new legal category. A more radical approach would be to create a third legal category, Right now, we have persons and property. We could create an intermediate category, perhaps called sentient property or companion animals. In this category, animals would still be owned, but they'd have a legal status that recognizes their capacity for pain, emotion, and social bonding. This would allow courts to award damages beyond market value in cases of malpractice or wrongful death, acknowledging the loss of companionship itself. This is the middle ground that respects human ownership rights while granting animals greater legal protection. The third solution would be strengthening the existing framework. The most conservative approach is to work within the current property system. Instead of creating new categories, we could simply strengthen the laws we already have. This would involve dramatically increasing penalties for animal cruelty to make them a true deterrent. It would mean providing greater funding for animal control and enforcement agencies. And it would mean pushing for clearer, more robust interpretations of laws like ADA to ensure their protections are not eroded. This path focuses on practical improvements without fundamentally changing the legal philosophy. Each of these solutions has its own set of pros, cons, and political hurdles, but they all represent different ways to address the gap between our hearts and laws. So, are dogs really man's best friend? Emotionally, for millions of us, yes. But in the system we've built, the answer is more complicated. They are our companions, our helpers, and our family members, but they also are our property. A legal status rooted in a history of function that doesn't quite match their modern role. We've seen that while there are bipartisan agreements on preventing cruelty, our most fundamental laws, like the First Amendment and Supreme Court precedents, reveal deep, ongoing tensions. By looking at historical parallels like the changing status of children, we can see that these systems are capable of evolving. And by considering multiple solutions, from simple language changes to creating entirely new legal categories, we can see the possible paths forward. The phrase, man's best friend, is more than just saying, it's a window into one of the most complex evolving relationships in our society. That's it for this episode of The Stuff You Should Think About. A huge thank you for listening. And if you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. Download and leave a comment about your thoughts on this episode or a phenomena or object you would like discussed in future episodes on whatever platform you listen to this podcast. Until next time, stay curious. Stuff you should think about with G. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Statements are based on current scientific understanding, historical records, and public policy.